6:35 in the evening. April 1, 2026. At the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida, a rocket ignited. And for the first time in 53 years, human beings left the Earth to visit the Moon. Not a simulation. Not a rehearsal. Not a promise made by a politician at a press conference. It happened. 4 people strapped themselves into a capsule named Integrity, sat on top of the most powerful rocket NASA has ever launched, and rode fire into the sky above Florida while the rest of the world watched and held its breath. This is the complete story of that mission. Every launch anomaly, every technical failure, every breathtaking discovery, and every moment where 4 human beings saw something with their own eyes that no person had ever seen before in the history of our species. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why Artemis 2 wasn't just a space mission. It was the moment everything changed. The launch was almost flawless. Almost. In the final minutes before ignition, ground controllers detected irregular readings from the Flight Termination System, the FTS. If that name sounds ominous, that's because the job it does is exactly that. The FTS is a network of explosive charges wired directly into the rocket's fuel tank. Its sole purpose, if ever triggered, is to destroy the vehicle mid-flight before it can fall on a populated area. The crew would escape in their capsule. The rocket would cease to exist. The anomalous readings delayed liftoff by 11 minutes. Engineers traced the fault to a faulty sensor. The system itself was fully operational. Problem resolved. But it was a sharp, sobering reminder of how narrow the margins are on a mission like this, even before a single engine fires. The SLS had already endured a punishing year. A hydrogen leak in February. Then a helium leak days later. The vehicle was rolled back into the vehicle assembly building, disassembled, repaired, and returned to the pad, all before a single crew member climbed aboard. But at 6:35 p.m., none of that history mattered anymore. The hold-down clamps released. Integrity rose. The 4 people on board, Commander Reed Wiseman, 27 years as a U.S. Navy fighter pilot, ISS veteran, former chief of NASA's astronaut office. Pilot Victor Glover, naval aviator, combat veteran, his hands on the controls of humanity's return to the Moon. Mission specialist Christina Koch, electrical engineer, Antarctic field researcher, holder of the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman in history at 328 consecutive days. And mission specialist Jeremy Hansen, Canadian Space Agency astronaut, fighter pilot, aquanaut, and the first Canadian to travel to the Moon. The capsule they named Integrity was not purely American. The service module beneath it, providing propulsion, power, and life support, was designed and built in Germany under contract from the European Space Agency. The name was a deliberate tribute. Thousands of people, across dozens of nations, working in concert to send 4 human beings back to the Moon. 8.5 minutes after ignition, the booster engines cut off at 160 kilometers altitude. The spacecraft separated into Earth orbit. The first leg was complete. In orbit, Integrity climbed to a high elliptical path, an oval loop swinging the spacecraft out to 70,000 kilometers on one end, and as low as 300 kilometers on the other. Here the crew paused and conducted a full systems audit. This was only the second time an Orion capsule had ever flown. The first time, there was nobody inside. Now, 4 lives depended on every system performing exactly as designed. 2 problems surfaced almost immediately. The first involved the toilet. The Universal Waste Management System, NASA's clinically sterile name for the bathroom, had been one of the flagship upgrades of the modern lunar program. The Apollo astronauts, for all their legendary courage, had urinated through tubes and defecated into plastic bags, sealed inside a confined capsule with no ventilation. Integrity was supposed to end all of that. The suction fan powering the liquid waste system had failed. Number 1 was out of service. The crew fell back on what NASA calls the contingency urinary containment system. A bag. They were peeing in a bag. On the most sophisticated crewed spacecraft ever built. Heading to the Moon. Number 2 remained fully functional throughout. Small mercies. The second problem was more universally relatable. The crew's official NASA Microsoft Outlook accounts, both of them, were locked. Authentication error. 4 of the most elite, exhaustively trained human beings on the planet, floating 70,000 kilometers above the Earth, unable to log into their email. If you have ever worked in a Microsoft Teams environment, you felt this in your soul. With both issues documented and reluctantly accepted, ground control unanimously cleared integrity for the trans-lunar injection burn. The main engine fired. The spacecraft broke away from Earth orbit. The moon stopped being a destination on a screen and became a growing light in the windows. There was no turning back. As integrity accelerated outward and the Earth began to shrink behind them, the crew did something that had never been done before in the history of human spaceflight. They photographed the entire Earth in a single frame. This requires explanation. The images of the complete globe that you have seen your entire life, the ones showing Earth suspended whole in black space, are composites. Assembled from dozens of individual photographs, stitched together by software, because any spacecraft in normal Earth orbit is far too close to capture the entire planet in one shot. To photograph the full Earth in a single image, you need to be very far away. On April 3rd, at a distance of approximately 160,000 kilometers from Earth, mission specialist Christina Koch raised a Nikon D5 camera fitted with a wide-angle lens and pressed the shutter. The image is called Hello World. It shows the complete sphere of Earth, every continent, every ocean, every weather system, suspended in absolute blackness. Along one edge of the globe, the first pale light of the sun is barely cresting the horizon. The illuminated side of the planet facing the camera is lit not by the sun, but by reflected moonlight, the moon itself bouncing solar energy back onto Earth's night side, casting just enough light for the Nikon's extraordinary low-light sensor to capture it in full detail. This photograph joins a very short list of images that have permanently altered how humanity sees itself. Apollo 8's Earthrise. Voyager 1's pale blue dot. And now this, the first true single-frame portrait of our entire world, taken by a human hand, from further away than any person had ever been. And the mission had barely begun. On day 5, integrity reached its furthest point from Earth. 252,000 miles. 405,000 kilometers. Further from home than any human being has ever traveled in the entire recorded history of our species. The Apollo crews, for all the extraordinary audacity of their missions, never reached this distance. They flew tight orbits around the moon, just over 100 kilometers above the surface, circling the equator, seeing only one small region at a time. Artemis 2 took a completely different approach. A wide, sweeping arc that brought integrity to an altitude of approximately 6,400 kilometers above the lunar surface. From there, the moon didn't look the way any human had ever seen it. Not a partial disk. Not a crescent. The entire moon, pole to pole, near side to far side, filled the windows as a complete sphere. Christina Koch described it as holding a basketball at the end of your arm. That is how large the moon appeared to the naked human eye. And from that vantage point, the crew saw something else entirely. 2 craters on the lunar surface that had never been catalogued before. Not visible in satellite imagery. Not recorded in any previous mission data. Spotted by human eyes doing what no camera sensor has ever fully replicated, perceiving subtle contrast, fine shadow, and nuance across a vast range of light and dark simultaneously. The crew proposed names for both craters. The first, Integrity, named for the spacecraft that carried them there. The second, and this one carries weight that goes far beyond science, Carol, named for Commander Reed Wiseman's wife, who passed away in 2020. A crater on the moon. Permanent. Unchanging. Named for a woman who never got to watch her husband make this journey. There is no instrument that measures what that moment meant. But it happened. And that name will be on lunar maps long after every person alive today is gone. As Integrity completed its arc, The crew crossed a boundary no human eye had ever crossed in person. The Terminator line. The precise edge between the near side of the moon, the face that has looked down on every human being who has ever lived, and the far side. The hemisphere Earth has never once seen directly, in the entire history of our planet. People call it the dark side of the moon. That name is wrong. It receives exactly as much sunlight as any other part of the lunar surface. What makes it extraordinary is simply this: the moon's synchronous rotation means that hemisphere has always, without exception, faced away from us. Every image we've ever had of it came from orbiting satellites. No human being had ever seen it with their own eyes until April 2026. The crew described the color immediately. The near side, the face we know, is marked by vast dark plains, ancient volcanic lakes that flooded with molten rock billions of years ago as the moon cooled and formed. The far side has none of them. It is dramatically paler, almost uniformly light. The volcanic activity, for reasons science still cannot fully explain, was concentrated entirely on the Earth-facing hemisphere. What fills the far side instead is craters. Thousands of them, stacked on top of each other across billions of years of uninterrupted bombardment. Raw. Ancient. The oldest exposed geology in the solar system. The crew photographed the Terminator line in extraordinary detail. Along that boundary, sunlight strikes the surface at an almost horizontal angle, throwing every ridge, cliff face, and crater rim into violent contrast. The crew noted that the moon is nowhere near as flat as it appears from Earth. There are mountain peaks of startling height. There are cliff walls that plunge into deep shadow. The terrain is complex, rugged, and completely unlike anything Apollo ever touched. And somewhere within that landscape is the South Pole Aitken Basin, the target for future Artemis landings and the intended site of humanity's first permanent lunar outpost. Looking at those photographs, one thing is immediately clear. The Artemis landings will be unlike anything the Apollo program ever attempted. And that makes them both more dangerous and infinitely more important. As Integrity rounded the far side, something happened that no crew had ever witnessed in person. The Earth set below the lunar horizon. Not a sunset. An Earth set. Every human being alive. Every ocean and mountain and city. Every piece of history our species has ever produced, slipping silently below the edge of the moon and vanishing from view. And with it, communications went dark. Laser-based communication requires line of sight. Once the moon's mass passed between the spacecraft and Earth, the signal was severed completely. For approximately 40 minutes, the 4 crew members of Integrity were unreachable. No signal in. No signal out. The most isolated human beings in history, in total silence. Then the signal returned. And on the other side of that silence, they witnessed an Earthrise. The same sight that stopped the Apollo 8 crew on Christmas Eve, 1968. The same photograph that transformed how a generation understood this planet. Now witnessed again, by new eyes in higher resolution, for a generation that had never seen it happen in real time. But the mission still had one more extraordinary moment to deliver. That evening, from the far side of the moon, the crew observed a total solar eclipse. From Earth, total eclipses are rare, fleeting, and barely longer than a few minutes. The sun and moon appear almost identical in angular size from our surface, so coverage is brief. From 6,400 kilometers above the moon, the geometry is completely different. The moon appears vastly larger than the sun. The eclipse was total. And it lasted 54 uninterrupted minutes. For 54 minutes, with the sun completely blocked, the crew photographed the moonscape with stars and planets visible in the background behind it. A sight that is physically impossible to see from Earth under any circumstances. And to anyone who has ever heard the conspiracy claim that the moon landings were faked because there are no stars in the photographs, here is your definitive answer. You cannot see stars when the sun is shining, just as you cannot see them on Earth in broad daylight. Remove the sun. The stars emerge. Exactly as physics has always predicted. Exactly as they appeared to the crew of Integrity on the far side of the moon in April 2026. 4 days after leaving the moon, the journey home reached its most dangerous point. Re-entry. Returning from the moon is nothing like coming home from the International Space Station. The ISS sits in a relatively low orbit. Its crews re-enter at manageable speeds. Integrity was returning from 405,000 kilometers away, carrying the full momentum of a free return trajectory. The capsule hit the upper atmosphere at over 40,000 kilometers per hour, 32 times the speed of sound. At that velocity, the air molecules ahead of the capsule have no time to move. They compress with such violent force that they transition into a fourth state of matter, plasma. Superheated. Electrically charged. Glowing at temperatures between 4,000 and 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit along the heat shield face. That plasma conducts electricity. And electricity disrupts radio waves. Communications with the crew went completely dead. For 6 full minutes, the world lost contact with Integrity. The crew were decelerating at 4 times the force of Earth's gravity, pressed hard into their seats, surrounded by fire visible through the capsule windows, completely unreachable by any signal on Earth. The heat shield, tested once before on the uncrewed Artemis 1 mission in 2022, either held or it didn't. Then the plasma field thinned. The signal returned. The voices of 4 astronauts came through the speakers in mission control, calm, composed, intact. The world exhaled. At 5:07 in the afternoon, local time, off the coast of San Diego, California, Integrity splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. 695,081 miles total. Earth to moon and back again. 10 days. 1 toilet bag. 2 locked email accounts. 2 newly named craters. 1 photograph that will be in history books for centuries. And 1 54-minute eclipse that no human eye had ever seen before. The capsule deployed 5 red helium balloons from its nose to keep it upright in the 4-foot Pacific swells. One final minor complication. Commander Wiseman could hear the recovery team clearly, but they could not hear him. So the recovery boats circled patiently in the California afternoon sun, waiting for the signal that never quite came, until they simply moved in and opened the hatch from outside. Fresh air entered the capsule for the first time since the previous Wednesday. One by one, the crew were lifted by helicopter from the capsule's inflatable recovery platform, nicknamed the front porch, and lowered onto the deck of a U.S. Navy ship. From there, straight to the medical bay. All 4 astronauts, healthy, stable, smiling. 53 years of waiting. 10 days of flying. 695,000 miles of distance. And here is what matters most about all of it. Artemis 2 was not the destination. It was the proof. The proof that the rocket works. That the capsule works. That human beings can travel to the moon and return safely in the modern era. What comes next is the landing. Then the base. Then permanent human presence on another world. Then Mars. All of it begins here. With 4 people, a capsule named Integrity, and a journey that the generation watching right now will remember for the rest of their lives. Subscribe, because the next chapter of this story launches soon. And you will not want to miss it.